Welcome back to another Evo patch review video. This is going to cover the last few Evocati builds for 3.24. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend watching my first video on this patch cycle. I would also make sure that you either read the patch notes or watch patch notes updates so you can see how they correlate with testing. I also want to remind you that this is my experience with the build and not everyone has the same issues. It's been almost 2 weeks since my last video, so I'm going to try to keep my observations to what is more relevant. In the last few builds, CIG has added the focus of cargo hauling missions, which is something I know a lot of us have been waiting for. The first thing I will say is these builds saw improvement when it comes to the 60k errors while trying to load into servers over the first build. The loading times are also much faster when jumping back in, and I don't think I waited longer than 3 minutes. On the first build, I would hit 10-minute load times before it would kick me back out to the main menu. I also haven't had to recopy my account at all since the first build, which is a good sign. There's still quite a few blockers besides server performance, so I don't expect to see new waves being added anytime soon. Moving on to my experience, there's still more work to be done with personal hangars. In my opinion, this is the main reason we haven't seen a push to Wave 1 release. From what I've gathered in my testing, if the server 30Ks, you lose your personal hangar and everything in it. This is a huge issue, especially when having to manually load cargo. Now, this could still be an issue with normal instance hangars too, but once you log off, anything in those hangars will be wiped. In the last 2 builds, I've been fortunate enough to not come across a 30k, but I know others have. I also haven't had as many server recoveries, but I think a lot of that depends on when players are testing and stressing the shard. One thing that has made progress is when I did experience a server recovery while in a hangar, I wasn't locked out of being able to access the elevators. This was a frustrating bug because you had to relog to remedy the situation. While not having random people access your hangar is a good thing, it does make rescuing someone in this situation impossible if they aren't in your party. Even with that issue resolved, I have experienced a lot of problems with calling ships in hangars. Sometimes it can take 15 to 30 minutes just to try and get the right ship out. In the latest build I tested, all terminal screens inside your hangar can also become unresponsive. If you already have a ship out, you might be able to call the station, and when they open the hangar doors, it will return its functionality. But then you have to live with the hangar door being wide open to anyone who might not have the best intentions. Sometimes you get lucky, and if the ASOP terminals by the elevators doesn't work, the one by the freight elevator might. If you happen to be calling your ship for the first time outside of a hangar, you can almost guarantee that it will be stuck under the elevator. The only way to remedy this situation is to call another ship out and store the initial ship. Another special issue that I came across has to deal with the Crusader C1 and A1. When you're given a landing pad, it puts you in a small hangar, but if you look at the ASOP terminal in your hangar, it doesn't show up as a ship that can be called in the stored location. I'm not sure if it's meant to be in the small hangar or medium hangar at this point. Yes, it does fit in the small, with just enough room that you can rotate 360 degrees, but it is very tight. It would really be nice to see this in a medium hangar instead. While you could work around these hangar issues, it can get very tedious, especially when the focus is testing hangar and cargo changes. I've had people ask me to test things outside of the hangars, and that's another issue. There are times when you call the station to leave, and the doors will never open. Sometimes you get the audio cue that the hangar doors are opening, but they're still physically shut. Again, if you log out then back in, this will usually resolve the issue, but is not viable, especially when you're in the middle of a mission you don't want to forfeit. In the past, you might have been able to get a ship to spawn in a different hangar, but the new hangar instancing doesn't allow this. This is also probably a good time to talk about the new cargo hauling missions and how they should work before getting into freight issues. If you don't know what these are, I'll give a brief explanation of how they work so far in the game. From my experience, you start off with an introductory mission which seems to always be moving tungsten from the space station to either a distribution center or the main city. I only attempted this around Lorville, so it might be different in other areas. From the numerous amount of times I've tried to complete this first mission, I have been asked to move anywhere from 9 to 10 SCUs of tungsten, and each time it was all in 1 SCU containers. Finding the cargo on the freight elevator terminal is straightforward, and when you deliver the freight, you are asked if you want to complete the mission or just use the elevator how you normally would. One nice thing about these missions is that they seem to complete the minute you send the cargo down the elevator. This means no having to play Transit Simulator to offload your goods. I'm looking forward to some more stable builds so I can really see how difficult the progression will be along with the average loading times. I believe hangar size and the ship used will start to become more relevant in the patches to come. A few ships I tried were the Nomad and C1. My reasoning for this was they both have ship tractor beams and I was hoping to save some time. I will say that I prefer the Nomad just because of its size at the moment, as it makes lining up with the freight elevator pretty easy. If hover trolleys were working, they might make this process easier. Unfortunately, hover trolleys have been completely removed from the last few builds because they just don't work. I haven't seen or heard anything on if they are still planned to make it in this release, but only time will tell. That's really all the insight I have for now, since I've only been able to complete one successful cargo hauling mission since they were introduced a few builds ago. While the issues aren't just with ship elevators and hangar doors, freight elevators get a bit of the blame too. I'll start off with a positive, and that is weapons can now be picked up from the freight elevator. The unfortunate issue is that you may have a trigger-happy party member because weapons will now allow you to fire in the hangar as well. I still wouldn't recommend calling out personal items on the freight elevator because it may lead to some other issues. One such issue is that if you remove a weapon or even utility item, sometimes the elevator doesn't register that it's snapped on its grid. This causes the elevator to say it's blocked, even though the item blocking it should be able to go down and be stored in the warehouse. Something else that can block the elevator at this time is mining bags. While I haven't done a deep dive on how mining will be affected with the cargo changes, I did buy some empty bags to put on the freight elevator to see how they would be called up. The unfortunate news is that so far the bags spawn clipped through the elevator floor, and the minute you try to tractor beam them, they fall through the geometry. This will completely break your elevator since there's no way to unblock the elevator, and I've had to just relog once this happens. One more thing that is important to note about freight elevators is size does matter now. In my last video, I talked about elevator sizes and SCU capacity. This is important if you are at trading outposts with and without landing pads. So far, they only appear to be able to hold 120 SCU. This means that you cannot place 32 SCU containers on them. The biggest container that will fit on an elevator of that size is 24 SCU. I'm bringing this up because I'm sure a lot of cargo haulers were thinking about using a C2 and 32 SCU containers to make loading faster. As of right now, don't expect to be able to transfer 32 SCU containers outside of stations and major landing zones. The last big issue I've heard about, but haven't had someone to test it. So far, cargo that is on an elevator could be stolen by any player. All they need to do is send the freight elevator to the warehouse, and any items on it will be transferred to the person who gave the command. This is extremely problematic for anyone trying to solo trade at outposts, as it makes them extremely vulnerable to pirates. The only workaround is having someone stay interacting with the terminal, but this isn't viable at locations that have no armistice zone. I can't really fault CIG for this issue because I'm sure it was done so that freight can be moved around by players more easily. This system does need to be looked at, and I'm not expecting it to make everyone happy when they find a fix. It would be nice if freight could be given a tag so that it is only stored for the owner and party members at outposts, but anyone could store it at stations and landing zones. This would at least be a start and still allow players to store salvaged or stolen cargo to be moved later. I didn't get to test the build that was released last night, but it was taken down after a few hours. It sounds like there should be another Evo release today, and hopefully this one will be stable enough to stay up over the weekend. This update video has already taken me longer to get out than I would have liked, but with the amount of time it takes to get things done in these builds, I would rather focus on testing. I will try to get more consistent updates out for those of you that take the time to watch these. As of right now, I don't see wave access being opened up anytime soon. I also don't think they will roll out waves next week unless one of three things happens. We see significant improvement in the build if it gets released today, significant progress on a Monday or Tuesday build, or there's a drastic drop in Evo testers. I know a lot of people are wanting to dive into the build, but as of right now I think CIG knows where the major issues are, so there's no need for widespread testing yet. I just want to be more of a realist and not get on the hype train stringing players along. I'm sure there might be some things I missed going over this video, and if you have any questions and thoughts, feel free to leave a comment. If you made it to the end of this video, I want to say thank you. As always, I hope you found this informative, and I'll catch you in the next one.